Alright, man. This is the continuation of part two. Go and check out my earlier videos, my Indian slave catalogs, man. And to be honest, man, if the Spanish took all these Indian slaves, and in Spain and all these other places there are dark-skinned people, then where are the Indian-looking people in Spain, Italy, and all these places they were took to? You know these were Negroes. But let's continue. No sooner had they set foot on shore near Charleston, South Carolina, than the English set upon establishing the peculiar institution of Native American slavery, seeking the goal that had changed the face of the Spanish Empire but finding none. The English settlers of the Carolinas quickly seized upon the most abundant and available resource they could attain. The indigenous peoples of the southeastern United States became themselves a commodity on the open market. The indigenous people of the southeastern, man, right? Florida, Georgia, Tennessee. Oh, man, come on, man. The South. What they called the South back then was supplanted with Indian slaves. Indian slaves. But let's go. Let's continue. Applying the same rhetoric that they had used in the genocidal campaign against the heathens and barbarians of Scotland and Ireland. The Carolinas cited Indian savagery and depredation as justification for the Indian wars to dispossess and enslave the Yamasee. I brought them out. I showed you those were Negroes. The Tuscarora, I meant to look that up and show you that they were Negroes. The Westo and eventually the Cherokee and the Creek. Man, these are Negroes, man. You go check them out yourself and see if they Negroes. They Negroes, man. But let's continue. Charleston and Savannah quickly became the centers of this North American and commercial slavery enterprise. In the latter half of 17th century, Native American nations throughout the South were played against each other. So Native Americans throughout the South were played against each other. Don't this sound like Crips and Bloods? And you can't tell me the Crip Walk is not an Indian dance. Come on, man. All right, let's continue. In an orgy of slave dealing that decimated entire peoples. This said an orgy of slave peoples. So they threw different Indians with different Indians. And I'm showing you they ain't do nothing but throw the children of Israel together. Man, I could be a damn Manassite and a Danite mix. That's what type of stuff this is. You know what I'm talking about? But let's continue. The Indian slave trade in the Carolinas, with these southern ports as their centers, rapidly took on all of the characteristics of the African slave trade. I showed you the African slave trade ain't nothing but African Jews being traded by Moors. Moors who are under Arabs. Moors are Muslims, the black Muslims, the Negro Muslims, they dark-skinned Muslims basically. But let us continue. The Carolinas formed all alliances with the coastal native groups, armed them, and encouraged them to make war on the weaker tribes deeper in the Carolina interior. So they made Indians fight against Indians. Don't that sound like the Negro fights that slave masters used to do? But let's continue. By the late years of the 17th century, caravans of Indian slaves were making their way from the Carolina backcountry to the forts on the coast, just as caravans of African slaves were doing on the African continent. Once in Charleston, the captives were loaded on ships for the Middle Passage to the West Indies or other colonies such as New Amsterdam or New England. It's black people in England and Amsterdam now. It's Negroes there. They don't call certain people over there Indians. They don't. They don't say, oh, these Negroes over there. Man, just, all right, let me continue. Many of the Indian slaves were kept at home and worked on the plantations of South. So Indians worked on plantations? Where they at in all these slave movies? Where they at, man? Come on now. You know what I'm talking about, but let's continue. By 1708, the number of Indian slaves in the Carolinas were nearly half that of the African slaves. So if it's 1 million African slaves, so quote unquote, then there's 1 million Indian slaves. You see what I'm talking about? Do you see what I'm talking about, man? And I brought it in my earlier videos, they brought African Jews. They brought Judah to be put together with Israel. Judah and Israel were oppressed together. But let me continue. Soon the Cherokee would become a major victim in the slave trade as early as 1681. A permit was issued for the export of two Cherokee, Cherokee. Is that like, I don't know. Well, we gonna check them out too. The Cherokee sound like Seroquel, but let's continue. From Charleston. By 1693, the Cherokee had become objects of the slave trade to the extent that tribal delegation was sent to the royal governor. Royal governor? How is he royal? But let's continue. Of South Carolina to protect the Cherokee. So somebody, they basically sent the decree to protect Cherokee from Congaree, Catawba, which is the Choctaw, and the Savannah slave catchers. Come on, man. Come on. I'm going to continue. In 1705, the Cherokee accused the colonial governor of granting commissions to slave catchers to set upon, assault, kill, destroy, and take captive Cherokee citizens to be sold into slavery for his and their profit. So they were Indian slaves. They never show you and tell you this. So who in the hell are these white looking people? Let me guess, the mulattoes. They gave power to the mulattoes. They gave power to the mulattoes. Let me continue. The Cherokee slave trade was so serious, you hear this? By the early half of the 18th century, eclipsed the trade for furs and skins and had become the primary source of 12 years a slave. Let me continue. Source of commerce between the English and the people of South Carolina. Damn devils. I'm gonna go ahead and upload this and continue with the next video, man.